honor to introduce our esteemed speaker today, Khaled Abu Toameh. You're in for a special treat. He's an Arab Israeli, a veteran, award-winning journalist, a preeminent expert on Israeli-Palestinian affairs. He has covered Palestinian affairs for the last 3 decades. He's a lecturer, a documentary filmmaker. He used to write for the Times of Israel, writes for the Jerusalem Post, and he's also a senior distinguished fellow at the New York-based Gateston Institute. He's a producer, consultant for NBC News since the late 80s. Truly an expert on the issue that we have to discuss today, which is the unlikely alliance or cooperation between Israel and the Palestinians. But Khaled, if we can maybe begin with a few personal remarks, if you can tell us about yourself and your background, because it is fascinating.
Thank you very much, and thank you to all our friends. I'm an Arab Israeli, as you said, which means I'm an Arab citizen of Israel. I'm Muslim. I don't know if that's relevant. My father belongs to the Arab community inside Israel, and that's why I'm an Israeli citizen. Although, by the way, my mother is a Palestinian from the West Bank. I've been working as a journalist for the last 36 or 37 years now. My beat is a Palestinian issue. I cover Palestinian affairs, which means, the West Bank and Gaza. I live in Jerusalem. I studied at Hebrew University. While I was going to university, while I was a student, I found work in a Palestinian newspaper in East Jerusalem. It was actually a PLO affiliated newspaper, if you can say something like that. I wasn't a member of the PLO, of course. I thought, it's an Israeli licensed paper, so I thought it was okay to try and do some journalism. I discovered later, or very quickly actually, that this was not real journalism. So I left that newspaper and I went out to work with the international media, later also with the Israeli media. When I say work with international media, what does that mean? It means helping international reporters who come here cover the Palestinian side of the conflict. We have many journalists who come here from all around the world every year, every month, every week, and sometimes even every day. When it comes to working in Israel, fortunately for us, the media people, Israel is a free and open country where a journalist can do anything he or she wants. But when it comes to working in the West Bank or Gaza, it's a completely different story. You can't just wake up in the morning and drive into Gaza on your own and say, good morning, I'm Brian Williams from NBC News. I would like to speak to Hamas. It doesn't work like that. So international reporters, when they go to these places, they hire people like me who take them there and make sure they return home in one piece. And that's what I've been doing for the last maybe 30 or 31 years with the international media. In addition to that, I'm also writing in several places. I used to write in Hebrew for a Hebrew language newspaper, Yidot Ahronot, about the Palestinians. I later became a reporter for the Jerusalem Report. It's a magazine. And from there, I moved on to the Times of Israel, then to the Jerusalem Post. So my beat is a Palestinian issue. And when I say the Palestinian issue, we're talking about, everything that happens in the West Bank and Gaza. I don't have many journalists that I can take to the West Bank and Gaza now. First of all, I can't go to Gaza anymore because I'm an Israeli citizen. And in recent years, most of my work has been focusing on the Palestinian Authority, in Ramallah and the inner workings of the Palestinian Authority and things like that. So that's basically, what I'm doing.
Thank you, Khaled. So since you touched on that, let's delve deeply into the Palestinian Authority politics. So on the one hand, you have unprecedented assistance from Israel and cooperation on the virus. There was a shared situation room, Israel providing equipment and even training and worker permits for tens of thousands of Palestinian workers in Israel, even economic assistance. So do you see all of this cooperation leading to improved future cooperation between Israel and the Palestinian Authority?
Well, I wish that were the case, to be honest with you. To start with, cooperation between Israel and the Palestinian Authority is not a new thing. We've had security coordination between the two, between the Palestinian security forces and the Israeli authorities for a long time now, and it's working. It's mutual interest for both sides. It benefits Israel, but of course it benefits the Palestinian Authority, the security coordination. Although the Palestinian Authority does not really like to talk much about this security coordination because it has negative connotations for many Palestinians. You know, cooperation with Israel is a sign of treatment, a sign of treason, sorry. That's how many Palestinians see it. And indeed, the Palestinian Authority has been under attack because of the security coordination, which is termed treason by many Palestinians who don't like it. So security coordination has been there. It benefits also the Palestinian Authority because without Israel's presence in the West Bank, I doubt if the Palestinian Authority would remain in power for one day. I would even go further and say that I believe that if Israel were to withdraw tomorrow morning from the West Bank, we will see a Hamas takeover of the West Bank. So in many ways, Mahmoud Abbas, the Palestinian president, he owes, the fact that he's still in power. It's thanks to Israel. Were it not for the fact that Israeli soldiers are sitting less than 1 mile away from his home or from his office, I doubt if he will remain in power, and he knows that, by the way. So cooperation between Israel and the Palestinian Authority has been there in the security field. Now, after the outbreak of the COVID-19, we saw that Israel quickly moved to help the Palestinian Authority. At the beginning, when the first cases were discovered in Bethlehem, the Palestinians did not have their own testing kits. What they did, they took samples and sent them to Israeli hospitals. And there they got the results from the Israeli hospitals. And all of this was done, of course, in full cooperation between the Palestinian Authority and Israel, specifically the health ministries on both sides. And I personally was in Bethlehem during the first few days, and I saw how Israeli teams were coming to the outskirts of Bethlehem and meeting with their Palestinian counterparts and taking these samples and bringing them back later. Within a few days, we saw that Israel actually delivered some testing kits to the Palestinian Authority. Now the Palestinian Authority is able to conduct its own tests for its own people, in Bethlehem and elsewhere. We also saw that Israel was holding training sessions for Palestinian medics, for medical teams, together with their Israeli counterparts in Jericho and in other places. We also saw that Israel was allowing some medical teams to come into Israel to receive some training and to seek advice and consult with their with Israeli physicians and experts regarding the pandemic. At a later stage, Israel and the Palestinian Authority even established a joint operations room, they called it, where they meet on a daily basis to assess the situation, to exchange views about how to prevent the spread of the disease and things like that. So cooperation is taking place also in the medical field. It's very effective. It's very powerful, by the way. So that's the good news, that there is cooperation. And I believe that the small number of patients in the West Bank is largely due to this cooperation between Israel and the Palestinian Authority. Also, of course, the Palestinian Authority itself has taken very severe measures, lockdowns, restrictions of movement, in some places even curfews, and imposing heavy fines, and closing all kinds of shops, and arresting even people who break the or defy, the instructions. So as I said, that is all the good news. Now to the bad news. Has this cooperation really had any kind of a moderating effect on the Palestinians? I'm sorry to tell you, no. I've been following Palestinian rhetoric and Palestinian narratives for many, many years, and I can tell you that there's almost no change. On the contrary, in recent weeks, while the Palestinian Authority has been collaborating with Israel in the medical field and, of course, in the security field, we see Palestinian leaders continuing to incite against Israel, continuing to engage in blood libels against Israel, continuing to tell their people all these fantasies about Israel and its responsibility for the spread of the disease. I was at a number of briefings by Palestinian officials in Ramallah in the past few weeks. We heard all kinds of stories over there, how Israeli soldiers and Jewish settlers walk around in Palestinian communities and spit at cars and spit at doors in order to spread the virus and to cause damage to Palestinian communities. More recently, we heard another story that Israel is helping Palestinian workers who are working in Israel infiltrate back to the West Bank in order to spread the disease. That's because they assume that if you go to Israel, you get the disease, and then Israel has an interest in spreading that disease. So what does it do? It allows all these workers to go back to the West Bank and Gaza. In the media, or in the Palestinian media, you still have all these attacks on Israel. Israel is obstructing the work of Palestinian medical teams. Israel is restricting the movement of Palestinians. Israel is not allowing us to combat the disease. The most recent allegation is regarding Jerusalem. As you know, or I don't know if you know that, but agreements signed between Israel and the Palestinian Authority and an Israeli law actually prevents the Palestinian Authority from operating in Jerusalem. Not only Jerusalem, but in all of the state of Israel. Now, since the beginning of the crisis, we've seen the Palestinian Authority trying to use the virus, the disease, in order to renew its operations inside Israel. So what do? For example, they have all these Fatah activists belonging to the ruling Fatah faction, who are going around in neighborhoods in Jerusalem, spraying disinfectants, handing out leaflets, in some cases even trying to impose restrictions on the movements. And don't forget, we're talking about neighborhoods that are actually inside Israel, under Israeli sovereignty. Now, one would ask, what's the connection between Fatah activists and a pandemic? What experience do they have? They're not medical teams, but we do see that the Palestinian Authority is trying to use it as an excuse in order to extend its control or operate inside Jerusalem. And when Israel tries to intercept them or prevent them from operating, they complain to the world, oh, Israel doesn't want us to fight the disease. That's because Israel wants the disease to spread among the Arabs and things like that. So the tone, as I said, is very bad. You would have expected the Palestinian Authority to at least lower the tone, lower the volume, I say. This is not a time for incitement or for the delegitimization of Israel. It doesn't really serve anyone's interests. That's my personal view, of course, but I would say that, it's very worrying that Palestinian leaders are playing a double game. On the one hand, they're asking Israel for help, and Israel is helping. On the other hand, they are continuing to incite their people against Israel. This incitement, of course, is very serious because it's a type of rhetoric that drives young people to go out, grab a knife, and stab the first Jew they meet. If you are telling your people that Jews spread diseases and Jewish settlements are hotbeds for coronavirus, and Jewish soldiers and the Jewish settlers are entering our communities in order to spread the disease, what message does that send to the young people? It's like telling them the next time you see an IDF soldier or a Jewish settler, go out and attack him because this is an act of self-defense. You are preventing these Jews from spreading the disease. But of course, as I said, I'm very familiar with this double talk. It's not new. It's been there for a long time among the Palestinian Authority leadership, where you tell your people one thing and you do another thing. And this is a very serious thing.
One person who has been missing throughout this crisis is Mahmoud Abbas, the Palestinian president. How do you see the political side of these events in the last few weeks on the West Bank?
Well, President Abbas has been in self-isolation since the beginning of this crisis. He's at home, I can tell you that. And a couple of hours ago, he actually appeared. Not in public, of course, but in a video conference, talking to the cabinet, the Palestinian cabinet that met in Ramallah. He addressed them, his ministers and the prime minister. Of course, this was an attempt on the part of Abbas to show that I'm in control. Many Palestinians have been asking in the last few weeks, where is the president? How come, he doesn't come to work? How come we don't see him? How come he's only communicating with us through phone calls and video conferences? Also, Palestinians have been talking about Muhammad Shtayeh's leading role in combating the virus. Muhammad Shtayeh is the prime minister. He's 62 years old. He's seen as a very charismatic figure. He has become the face of the Palestinian fight against the virus, while Mahmoud Abbas, who is 84 and with many underlying conditions, many underlying health issues, is sitting at home. And I think that Abbas has noticed that, Palestinians have realized that he's been away for a long time, and that's one of the reasons why he made this appearance a couple of hours ago. He looks fine from what we saw on video. I just filed a story for the Jerusalem Post about his comments to the cabinet. You can see that on the Jerusalem Post website, but the basic thing was, or the basic message that he sent was, I'm in control. The Palestinian government is acting on my instructions. He even ordered the Palestinian Authority, the Palestinian government, to ease restrictions on the Palestinians. And of course, he did not forget to send a message to the United States and Israel. His message is, beware, although we are preoccupied with the virus, we haven't forgotten about annexation. We haven't forgotten about settlements. What he did, he warned the Israeli government and the US administration against applying Israeli law to the Jordan Valley and the northern Dead Sea. And he even threatened that if that happens, the Palestinian Authority will immediately respond with its own measures. Of course, he did not say what these measures are, but if you look back, you will see that Abbas himself and other Palestinian officials have been threatening that if Israel does anything like that, such as applying Israeli law to any part of the West Bank, then the Palestinians will relinquish or abandon all signed agreements with Israel. They will also suspend security coordination with Israel. And some of them were also quoted as saying, oh, we will revoke Palestinian recognition of Israel. They're referring to the PLO recognition of Israel on the eve of the Oslo Accords in 1993. There was an exchange of letters between Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin and Yasser Arafat back then, where Arafat sent a letter to Rabin saying, okay, we recognize Israel's right to exist. So the Palestinian position has been that, oh, we did you a favor by recognizing you back then. And if you dare to do anything we don't like, we will revoke that recognition. We will no longer recognize Israel's right to exist. Some Palestinians, of course, think that these are just empty threats on the part of Abu Mazen, and that he can't really do anything because if, for example, he suspends all the agreements with Israel, then you're actually suspending the Oslo Accords. And if you suspend the Oslo Accords, the Palestinian Authority ceases to exist. In other words, Abu Mazen would be, or Abbas would be, shooting himself in the foot if he does something like that. If you suspend security coordination with Israel, you're actually emboldening Hamas, because the presence of the IDF in the West Bank prevents Hamas from taking over the West Bank. And if Hamas takes over the West Bank, it will be the end of President Abbas and company over there. So it's a dilemma for Abbas. But again, the point here is the rhetoric. If you are going to address your people about the coronavirus, what's the relevance now of attacking Israel and Trump and the deal of the century and annexation? Annexation hasn't even happened yet. There isn't even an Israeli government. No Israeli government has been formed after the third election yet. So why is it so important always to come up or to include some kind of an attack on Israel, even when you're talking about medical issues? Go deal with the problems your people are facing. There are very serious economic problems now resulting from this health crisis, and many Palestinians are concerned. They're concerned whether they would be, able to receive salaries next month. They're concerned about all the loss of jobs and the closures and things like that. This is the most important thing for Palestinians now.
Khaled, as we're speaking, the breaking news is that we will have a government, a unity government that will be put together, and they're announcing it tonight. So it looks like there might be steps towards a extension of Israeli law on the West Bank later this year, before the elections in the United States. So how do you assess the real impact of that on the level of cooperation between the Palestinian Authority and Israel? And the second question, the last question about the Palestinian Authority is, do you think that this crisis could lead to improved U.S.-Palestinian relations?
Well, first of all, even if an Israeli government is formed, we're not going to see a real change in the position of the Palestinian Authority, because the Palestinian Authority's position is there's no real difference between Gantz and Netanyahu, although many Palestinian officials would like to see Netanyahu gone. But they will point out today that that Gantz had expressed support for the Trump plan, the same plan that allows Israel to apply or extend Israeli law to certain parts of the West Bank. So there is concern among some Palestinians that now, if a new government is formed, that Netanyahu would feel much more comfortable embarking on such a step now that he has Gantz on his side. I don't expect any real move on the part of the Palestinian Authority until Israel actually does something. We're not going to see, anything happen in the near future. They will wait to see if Israel really does it, and then they will take whatever measures they're talking about. But I said those were the only measures that they can come to mind right now: revocation of the recognition of Israel, abolishing all agreements with Israel. These are the only two major threats that they are talking about. I personally have doubts that they would be able to carry out any of these threats. We've heard these threats in the past. We heard them before Trump said or announced his decision, recognizing Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. We heard similar statements from Palestinian officials. Oh, if that happens, we will abandon all agreements with Israel. We will suspend security coordination with Israel. Nothing happened. And when the US administration halted funding to the United Nations Relief and Works Agency, UNRWA, we heard similar things from the Palestinian leadership. Oh, if that happens, we will do this. And, so these are not new threats. And we will hear the same. But I doubt if Mahmoud Abbas really has the power to do anything. The Palestinian Authority does not really have many options other than, issuing empty threats. And these empty threats are aimed at, appeasing their own people, to show their own people that we are doing something. In the last week or two, we saw a massive diplomatic campaign on the part by the Palestinians in the international arena to rally worldwide support against the possible annexation, as they call it. Saeb Erekat, the PLO Secretary General, has been phoning foreign ministers, EU officials, UN officials, warning them about the possibility of or the repercussions of an annexation by Israel and things like that. So you have all these threats. They're not new, as I said. The Palestinians will mostly focus their efforts in the diplomatic arena. They will try to get the UN and other international agencies to condemn Israel and to warn Israel. That's the most that they can do, I believe, right now. Will we see any kind of an improvement in relations between the Palestinian Authority and the Trump administration? So far, I don't see any signs of it happening. Mahmoud Abbas today, in his address to the Palestinian cabinet, he once again attacked the deal of the century. He once again spoke out against US support for Israel. Mahmoud Abbas has put himself in a difficult situation. He has actually climbed a high tree. He has been telling his people for the last 3 years that the US administration and Trump are the enemies of the Palestinians. They are Zionists. They are totally biased in favor of Israel. We will never deal with them. We will continue to boycott them. We will never accept anything from them. They cannot be trusted as honest brokers. These are the messages that President Abbas and the Palestinian Authority have been sending to their people. As a result, today, the Palestinian public is totally mobilized against the Trump administration, including, Trump's advisors and the US ambassador to Israel, David Friedman. And even if Mahmoud Abbas tomorrow morning decides to end the boycott of the Trump administration, his people will not accept it. They will tell him, on what basis are you renewing your ties with Trump? You, President Abbas, told us that Trump is, excuse my expression, a son of a dog. Trump is an enemy. Trump is totally biased in favor of Israel. So on what basis are you renewing your contacts with him? President Abbas has tied his own hands because of his rhetoric, his harsh anti-US, anti-Israel rhetoric. he has radicalized his people against Trump to a point where he cannot be seen dealing with Trump, at least not in the near future, I would say.
Thank you, Khaled. Still have a lot of ground to cover. We'll discuss Gaza and discuss areas inside Israel, including East Jerusalem. But we have two questions about the Palestinian Authority, and just for the sake of time, I will quickly read them. A question from Esther in Los Angeles about why would the Palestinian Authority continue with the incitement if they only stand to benefit medically from cooperation with Israel? And from our own Pascaline in Elnet, Israel, what would be the most efficient way to counter Palestinian incitement? Would it be from the inside? Would it be external influence? And how do you evaluate the role of Europe? And what can Elnet do to help on this very important issue that we're dealing with?
Look, I understand the first question because it really doesn't make sense. People would say, but what's the logic behind it? Why are you inciting against the same people who are also helping you? Well, welcome to the Palestinian culture, to the world of the Palestinians, where if you want to score points among the Palestinian public, the best way to do it is by attacking Israel, even if Israel is helping you. Some Palestinian leaders are also wary of their cooperation with Israel, which is seen as a sign of treason by their own people. So how do you defend yourself against allegations like that? You start criticizing Israel. You start saying all these awful things about Israel so that your people will embrace you and they will say, oh, he is a good guy. He's not a collaborator with Israel. He's not a traitor with Israel. The same applies, by the way, not only to the medical cooperation, but also to the security coordination between Israel and the Palestinian Authority. So these are the main reasons why this kind of incitement is continuing. I need to remind you that this incitement is not even seen as incitement by the Palestinians themselves. They see it as, part of a narrative, as part of a way of expressing their views. Last week, after Israel warned the Palestinian Authority about the incitement, I was in Ramallah for a press briefing with the spokesman of the Palestinian government. And a colleague of mine asked him, what is your reaction to the Israeli charges that you are inciting, that you need to stop the incitement? And he was surprised. He said, what incitement? We are telling the truth. We are stating facts. Why is this incitement? And he even repeated the same charges that the Palestinian Authority has been making, that Jews spit on Palestinian cars in order to spread the virus, that Jews allow Palestinian workers to infiltrate back to the West Bank in order to spread the virus, and he sees no problem with that. Part two of the second question was, can you?
Oh, sorry. And the second question is, what is the best way to combat that? Does it have to come from the inside, or is it external pressure, and the role of Europe?
Look, the best way to counter it is by showing what Israel is already doing. And I can tell you that Israel has improved in its way of explaining or countering this incitement. If, for example, they are saying that Jewish soldiers are walking around and spitting, you need to call them out. You need to expose these things to the public. They say these things in Arabic. You need to translate it and show the world what they are saying. That's very important. Many people in the international community are not aware because most of this incitement is being done in Arabic. So if you translate it, you expose them, you show how ridiculous some of these charges are, then the world will understand the mentality, they will understand the seriousness of the situation. Also, there are many Israeli institutions and government bodies that have been publishing things about, the help that Israel is doing or is giving to the Palestinians. That's very important. I've personally written about this several times. Almost every day I get statements and phone calls from Israeli officials telling us what Israel did today to help the Palestinians. We also see that some foreign journalists are also interested in these stories. Unfortunately, not many of them, because many journalists don't like these positive stories. They search for stories that reflect badly on Israel, or some of them even fully endorse the Palestinian claims in the Palestinian narrative without even questioning, anything. And that's very sad, because that comes from this whole belief, this whole theory, or this whole perception that this conflict is between good guys and bad guys. And the good guys are the poor Palestinians and the bad guys are the Israelis. This is unfortunately, and sadly, of course, how many of my Western colleagues here see this conflict. And on the basis of this perception, they do their reporting.
Khaled, do you think there's a serious potential leader in the West Bank to replace Mahmoud Abbas?
Look, there are many people who can replace him. That's not the issue. The issue, the real question should be, will whoever replaces Abbas, will he be different than Abbas? Why do people think that if someone else takes over from Abbas, then it's going to be different? It won't be different. I remember when Mahmoud Abbas was sworn in, when he took over from Yasser Arafat, in his first speech, he promised to continue in the footsteps of Yasser Arafat, the great leader, and to abide by all the Palestinian demands and all the Palestinian national principles. And I remember that speech. And when a new leader is sworn in to succeed Mahmoud Abbas, you will hear the same thing. Whoever is sworn in will repeat the same thing. He will say, I promise to continue in the footsteps of Mahmoud Abbas and Yasser Arafat, and the message will remain no and no and no. No to any concessions with Israel, no to signing any agreement that does not comply with all the Palestinian demands, and no to any kind of a compromise. The Palestinian position is very clear, by the way. The Palestinian Authority's position, at least, is very clear. Give us 100% of what you took in 1967, including East Jerusalem, or there's no deal. That is the Palestinian position. So don't assume that if someone replaces, Abbas, he can be much younger, he can be less corrupt, probably. He can be seen by many Westerners as being more pragmatic, he can be much more charismatic, but when it comes to Israel, there's absolutely no compromise.
We have a question from Poland, from Piotr Puta. If you can ask your question, Piotr. Can we unmute Piotr?
Can you hear me? Yes?
Yes.
Okay. I would like to ask Khaled, according to his assessment, if this annexation takes place, how it will affect the situation of civilian Palestinian population in the West Bank?
Well, as you know, the Palestinian or the West Bank is divided into 3 areas. Area A, which is under exclusive Palestinian control, which is basically the major cities. Area B, the rural area around the cities, which is jointly, I would say, controlled by Israel and the Palestinian Authority. And then Area C, which is under exclusive Israeli control. And the annexation we're talking about is going to take place in Area C, according to what we understand, at least. Now, in Area C, there are nearly 80,000, or some people would say 100,000 Palestinians living there. The question is, what will happen to these Palestinians? Will they also become Israeli citizens? Will they remain Palestinian citizens living under Israeli sovereignty? If you annex those areas, you will have to do what you did in 1968 in Jerusalem. In 1968, there were 65,000 Arabs living in East Jerusalem. Israel annexed East Jerusalem and gave these people, the Arabs living there, the status of permanent residents of Israel, which means they are entitled to all the rights of an Israeli citizen, with one exception, voting for the Israeli Knesset. Now the question is, will Israel do the same thing with these 80,000 Palestinians living in Area C, or in those areas that will be annexed by Israel? Will Israel turn them into Israeli residents and not citizens? Because one of the arguments of those who are opposed to this issue is that if you annex those areas, that means you will turn another 80,000 Palestinians into Israeli citizens, which is a demographic threat to Israel. But if these residents, or if these Palestinians remain residents and they can't vote for the Knesset, then they do not pose a demographic threat, so to speak, against Israel. So we will have to wait and see how that plays out. For now, we don't know. I'm not sure Israel has a plan yet as to what's going to happen with these people. Now, will the annexation affect other Palestinians living in the West Bank and Gaza? Probably. It could impose movement restrictions on them. And what do I mean by that? It will be the same as, the same rules will apply to those who want to enter Israel. If the Jordan Valley and the Northern Dead Sea become part of Israel, then a Palestinian living in the West Bank who wants to go to these areas will need to get permits from Israel to go there. So I'm just throwing, out, I'm playing out all the options. We still don't know. We have to wait. There is no detailed Israeli plan for dealing with these things yet.
Khaled, a quick question about Gaza, because we do want to cover that as well. It's important. So there's cooperation between Israel and Gaza. There's assistance, there's training. And the question is, there's also talk now or speculation about the possibility of a release of the Israeli civilian and soldier hostages in Gaza. If you can talk about that for a moment, and then we'll go back to some of the questions that we still have.
Look, contrary to all expectations, the situation in Gaza seems to be relatively good. We're talking about only 15 patients who have tested positive for corona virus. And this is, almost a miracle. Most of these patients, by the way, are people who returned to the Gaza Strip through Egypt and were stopped at the border by Hamas. So they did not have the chance to mix with other Palestinians in Gaza. And that's why Hamas, according to what we hear from people in Gaza, has been able to prevent the spread of the disease among its constituents. We're talking about 2 million Palestinians living in Gaza. Israel has been helping by facilitating the delivery of medical equipment provided by the World Health Organization and other organizations around the world to Gaza. Israel's been keeping an open eye on what's happening in Gaza, because at the beginning of the crisis, there was a big fear among many people in Israel, especially in the security establishment, that if there is a major outbreak in the Gaza Strip, you will see people rushing towards the Israel border. They're not going to rush towards the Egypt border to ask Egypt for help. Also, Israel has been allowing some physicians and medical teams to come into Israel for training, which is very good. At the same time, don't think that Hamas is going to change. They're not going to wake up in the morning and become Zionists because Israel is helping them in one way or another, directly or indirectly. You need to bear in mind that Hamas has one major goal: to remain in power. And Hamas is willing to do almost anything in order to remain in power in Gaza, even if that means some sort of collaboration with the Zionist enemy. And Hamas now, in order to, to achieve its goal, is talking about a prisoner exchange with Israel. We saw 2 weeks ago the leader of Hamas, Yahya Sinwar, come out with this. He calls it a humanitarian initiative, whereby Israel would release hundreds of Palestinian prisoners, especially the elderly, the patients, the females, and the minors, in return for information from Hamas about the fate of 4 Israelis who are believed to be held captive by Hamas in Gaza. According to Israel, there are, Hamas is holding the bodies of 2 soldiers, Hadar Gold and Shaul Oron, and there are another 2 Israeli civilians who crossed into Gaza voluntarily on their own. The 2 civilians are believed to be alive. So Hamas now sees an opportunity, probably also to get rid of the people it's holding and the bodies it is holding, and to strike some kind of a deal that would give it more time, more space to breathe and to consolidate its power in Gaza. Hamas has one thing in mind, as I said, it's just to remain in power in Gaza. They see the Palestinian Authority as being the #1 enemy now, as being the only party that really wants to bring them down, to undermine them. And they actually understand that Israel does not really want to bring down Hamas, that it's not an Israeli interest. So they see Hamas, they see the Palestinian Authority as being the #1 enemy, and Israel being less of an enemy, and probably an enemy that you can do business with.
Question from Adam Goodbach here in Israel. Adam?
Thanks, David. Hi, Khaled. Firstly, let me wish you a great Ramadan that's starting later this week. In terms of the question, given the internet access and the free flow of information available now, how common is it amongst Palestinian leaders and Palestinian people, the myths that we keep hearing, like the Holocaust didn't happen, there's no historic connection with Jerusalem, and the Jews are colonialists and will go away if we cause enough pain?
Look, I mean, you have to understand that Palestinians, first of all, have access to the internet, and they have access to outside sources. They're not dependent only on Palestinian Authority or Hamas for news, for information. But then you look around and you see, what are these news sources? If they're not watching the Palestinian Authority, they'll go to the Hezbollah TV. And if they're not watching the Hezbollah TV, they will go to the Islamic Jihad TV. These are very popular TV stations. And if they go on the internet, they will probably be exposed to all these jihadi websites and all these anti-Israel news sources that offer them all these blood libels about Israel. It's a culture, it's really become a cultural thing. It's become a cultural issue. And I keep saying the real education starts at home. And not even at school. In order for a Palestinian child to hate Israel, he doesn't necessarily have to go to school, sit in the classroom, open the history book, and after reading a few pages, he will say, oh my God, these Jews are awful. I need to hate them. I need to kill them. It's really become a cultural issue. And if we don't change the mindset, and if we don't start a process of de-radicalization, you will never move forward. I'm also sorry to tell you that social media is actually playing a negative role. We saw what happened 2 weeks ago in Gaza. A group of Palestinian activists who had a Zoom chat with Israeli activists were immediately imprisoned by Hamas. They were arrested by Hamas. Now, they were arrested after many Palestinians took to social media to shame them, to attack them, to call them collaborators, traitors. I have only seen a few Palestinians come to their defense, to the defense of these activists. And the biggest concern today of any moderate, pragmatic Palestinian is of being shamed on social media platforms. The last thing you would want is to be called a traitor and a collaborator with Israel, because then you get shot. And there are also social implications for that. Don't forget, it's a tribal society. It's a society based on clans. And what you do can affect your whole clan. It can bring shame on the whole clan, and the clan may be forced to disown you. And once the clan disowns you for doing something bad, that also has many repercussions. First of all, it could endanger your life because someone might decide to kill you or harm you, knowing that the rest of the clan will not come to your rescue, will not come, to seek revenge even. And on the more personal level, the last thing families want is to be boycotted. How will you be able to marry your daughter with a stain? If people are calling you a collaborator, that will affect your immediate family, and then no one will come to ask for your daughter's hand. So this is what I'm talking about, that although Palestinians are considered intelligent, they are amongst the most intelligent people in the Arab world, and the incitement, the indoctrination is there. It's at home, it's on the streets, it's what your leaders tell you, it's what you watch on TV, it's in the mosque also, it's all over. And that really requires a massive effort on the part of moderate, pragmatic Palestinians to do it, to stand up and say, enough is enough, this is not good for us, we need to do something about it. Sadly, I don't see many people doing it now. I don't see many people daring to stand up and say, we need a new direction. We need to change the core. We need to do something. We need to stop poisoning the hearts and minds of our young people. This is self-destructive. It is coming back as a boomerang. Why? Look what's happening in the Arab world, or what has been happening. When you're not killing a Jew, you start killing each other. And when you're not saying bad things about a Jew, you start saying bad things about each other. And if one day you glorify suicide bombers and jihadis, and you call them heroes and martyrs and shaheeds, then don't be surprised if you get the same type of heroes in quotes on the streets of Syria and Iraq and Gaza and Ramallah. And so the Palestinians, or the Arabs in general, are actually paying a heavy price for having raised an entire generation on all these bad messages.
We're going to go. We have a few more minutes, everyone, so please be patient with us. We started late, and this is very important material for all of us. Nir Bombs, if you want to ask your question, please.
I read, I think it was last week, that Omar Barghouti, the founder of the BDS movement, said that when it comes to the coronavirus, if Israel will develop a vaccine, we're not going to boycott it. We will be able to use it. And I heard that this statement had made some noise. And I just wonder, in the context of what you just told us, in the PA, I guess there is a possibility to have hopefully some other voices. I wonder if you follow this and this particular argument. So if there's going to be a vaccine, we'll still need to boycott it. Is that, or there are people who are basically saying, look, it's a crisis, let's use this to begin to change course. Are there voices like that you are hearing?
I mean, I do hear such voices, but it's more, in private, Nir. But why are you surprised by what Mr. Barghouti said? Have we forgotten that Israel has treated would-be suicide bombers? Have we forgotten that some of the Hamas leaders received medical treatment in Israel? Did you forget that Yahya Sinwar, the leader of Hamas, underwent brain surgery in Israel that actually saved his life after a tumor was removed? These people, and there are many, many examples. I personally know of many senior Palestinian officials who continue to receive the best medical treatment in Israel. And when they return home, they go back to their old habit of attacking Israel. And some of them even deny that they were treated in Israel so as not to be exposed as hypocrites and liars. With regards to Barghouti, I can tell you one good thing. If you ask many Palestinians, who is Omar Barghouti, the founder of BDS, I doubt if many of them know. I think many people in the West know about him, many people in the academia, and many activists on social media, but many Palestinians don't even know about Omar Barghouti. They don't care. They will not listen to whatever he says. It also reminds me, Nir, that a few years ago, when we used to ask Palestinians in the villages, and what do you think of BDS? They would look at us and say, BDS, is that a type of medicine or what? They're not really aware of what's happening on the campuses in Europe and elsewhere about all these. People just want to get along with their lives. That's also the good news, that most Palestinians don't really care. Every day I meet Palestinians who are continuing to work in settlements. 2 weeks ago, I interviewed the Palestinian Minister of National Economy, Mr. Osaili, Khaled Osaili. He has the same name as me, his first name. And he told me, look, it's business as usual with Israel. Every day, hundreds of trucks loaded with Israeli goods are coming into our cities, into our villages. We have no boycott of Israel. The only boycott or the only measure he took was to order Palestinians not to buy used furniture from Israel. On the eve of Passover, you have this habit where Jews like to sell their old furniture and things like that, and Palestinians like to buy them, and some of them like to trade in them, some of them like to keep them. So the Minister of National Economy issued an order saying, don't import used furniture or used items from Israel now, only because of the virus. We want to try to prevent it from spreading. Some people mistakenly thought that he was calling for a boycott of all Israeli goods, and he later clarified it. He said, no, I even used the Yiddish word anti-zachen when I talked about the used furniture, the used items. And he said, no, of course we don't boycott Israel. The trade with Israel remains as strong as ever. So, don't give Mr. Omar Barghouti too much credit, or these people like him, they don't surprise people like me who are very familiar with this hypocrisy. On the one hand, you call for boycotting Israel, but when you want medical help from Israel or anything like that, you don't hesitate. The first question I would ask Mr. Barghouti is, if you're really seeking or calling for boycotting Israel, why don't you give an example and give up your Israeli issued ID card, for example? Or why did you boycott Kopat Cholim, the medical centers, the Israeli healthcare system? Why don't you, give back your Israeli, the Tel Aviv University certificate, the diploma, the Bachelor's of Arts or whatever you received from there? So, Palestinians are aware of this hypocrisy, but the good news, as I said, is that many Palestinians don't really care. They don't listen to people like that. I have the feeling that most of the people who listen to them are, all kinds of activists around the world only.
Okay, we're almost done, folks. Peggy Shapiro, you have a great question, and we do want to go back to what Pascaline did say and ask about what can Europe do and the role of Elnet in all of this. But go ahead, because you have a continuation to your question, Peggy.
change in leadership will not bring peace. Am I?
Go ahead.
Can you hear me? We've heard so many ways that change in leadership won't bring peace. The education system as it is and the indoctrination is not a path to peace. Is there any road that we can see that might be a path for hope for peace?
Look, I know that many people are looking for solutions and many people want peace. And let me give you my take on this. And I've been saying this for some time. If I'm wrong, please let me know. Correct me, I don't know. I keep saying something like this. If you want to make peace with Israel, you need to prepare your people for peace with Israel. I mean, I can't think of a simpler way of putting it. The day Palestinian leadership starts preparing its people for the possibility of peace and compromise with Israel, then I will tell you I'm optimistic. But how can I tell you that I'm optimistic when I hear what's being said in the mosques, what's being said on Palestine TV, what's being said by Palestinian leaders? How can I be optimistic when I see an ongoing process of delegitimization of Israel and even demonization of Jews taking place not only by Hamas, but also by other Palestinian leaders who are considered, pragmatic and moderate in the eyes of the West, at least. So in that regard, if you're looking for peace and love and harmony right now, I don't think it's going to happen in the near future unless the narrative changes, unless you see brave Arabs and brave Muslims standing up and saying, enough is enough. This is not about Israel, it's about our own society, it's about the future of our children. We need to endorse a new approach. If that happens, then I will tell you I'm optimistic. So if you're looking for solutions, my preferred solution is Israel should continue working with any Palestinian who wants to work with Israel and fire back at anyone who shoots at Israel. And welcome to the status quo, by the way. Israel is fortunate that the Palestinian Authority, despite its hypocrisy and incitement, is also working with Israel. I said before, the Palestinian Authority is playing a double game. On the one hand, they're inciting their people against Israel. On the other hand, they are collaborating with Israel in many ways, security-wise, health-wise, and in other fields, in the economy, trade, and things like that. The question also is, what do you mean when you say peace? Look, I prefer the status quo to other experiments we've had here. The status quo brings me less violence, less casualties, and I don't want to start dreaming about peace and love and harmony. I don't think that's going to happen. Let's try to find ways to reduce the level of violence, to prevent the death of one Jew and one Arab. Every day that passes without the death of one Arab and one Jew is a victory. That's the real peace. For me, peace means that when I go to Rami Levy, I see an Arab who is the boss of a Jewish settler in the supermarket chain. And when I go, even today, I was near my home in a Palestinian village, and there were Jews coming there to fix their cars. And that village is, I even sometimes I think twice before going to that village because it's known as a Hamas stronghold. So on a day-to-day basis, you do have some kind of, coexistence, if you want, or quiet. I'm not looking for peace and love and harmony. I don't think that's going to happen. It can't happen when people are being radicalized and indoctrinated against Israel on a daily basis. I'm looking for ways to prevent violence, to prevent bloodshed, and to find common things between the Palestinians and the Israelis in the West Bank and Gaza. And one final point, every day I see wonderful and amazing things happening between Jews and Arabs in the West Bank. Some of them I don't even bother to report them because people won't believe it. they will think it's Jewish propaganda, or they will think I'm on the payroll of the Jewish lobby if I report all these positive stories about what I see. But I say, let that be. Maybe less coverage is good. Let them continue working, and let's see what happens.
Last question tonight here in Israel from Lee Rosenblum, the National Executive Director of Friends of Elnet in New York. Lee, go ahead. Lee, you're on mute. Okay, go ahead.
Today it's reported that senior officials in Riyadh are sort of embracing the Mideast peace plan, and that they are trying to encourage the Palestinians not to, let yet another opportunity pass for peace. Do you think that that will have any motivation or help in bringing the Palestinians to the negotiating table?
And why do we assume that Saudi leaders have leverage with the Palestinians?
I'm asking you.
I should tell you about the number of times I've seen the pictures of Mohammed bin Salman being burned on the streets of Ramallah and Gaza and Nablus, and I can refer you to many articles and leaflets that are being distributed in the West Bank and Gaza calling Mohammed bin Salman the traitor, the Zionist, the Arab, the Trump ally, the most dangerous leader. So why do we assume that Saudi Arabia has any effect? I wish it did, by the way. I would say something like this: no Arab leader can come to the Palestinians and tell them, make concessions to Israel. I don't see that happening. They might do it in private, by the way, but I would like to see an Arab leader stand up and tell Palestinians, listen, in public, of course, you need to make concessions to Israel. You need to recognize Jewish history. You need to consider some kind of a territorial compromise with Israel. Find me one Arab leader who will have the guts to stand up and say something like that. It will be like suicide. He will endanger his own throne, the Arab leader who does it. So, I don't know where this report came from, but I can tell you that Saudi Arabia does not really have much leverage with the Palestinians. If anyone has real leverage with the Palestinians, it's those who are giving them money, by the way. And who's giving them money? Now it's the Europeans. It used to be more the Americans. So the Europeans, maybe they can have some kind of a say in that, although I also doubt it, because if you look at the European position, they've actually endorsed the Palestinian position. They fully support all the Palestinian demands, and they're totally biased in favor of the Palestinians. So what can they do now? Are they going to come to the Palestinians and say, listen, you need to accept the annexation of this land or that land, and you need to recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel? I don't see that also happening.
Khaled, before we conclude, I think I want to say just on behalf of everyone here that this has been a tour de force. You're one of a kind. And we all learned, we continue to learn so much from you. And there's a reason why you're such a favorite and popular speaker for our delegations when they do come from all the countries that we operate in. So I want to thank you.